Rasmus Ankersen.
So we're kind of familiar with the fact that the best middle and long distance runners in the world tend to come from East Africa, from Ethiopia and from Kenya in particular. However, what might surprise you is when I now tell you that these 4 athletes not only come from Ethiopia, but they actually come from the same village in Ethiopia. Bekoji, a small village in the middle of nowhere with 17,000 inhabitants, and they produced probably the best middle distance runners in the history. Tanabu, 500 people, produced some of the best skiers in the history. So I mean, what's the secret behind these clusters of world-class performers? And what can we learn from them if we want to create our own gold mines of talent in business? So basically for 6 months I traveled around the world and lived and trained in these gold mines. This is the secret with gold mines. It's small places that capitalize exceptionally well on talent that always existed. Very few people know is that when Ronaldo was 15 years old, the biggest Brazilian club, Flamengo, refused to pay his bus ticket from where he lived into the training ground because he was too tiny, he was never going to make it. This is Michael Jordan, the best basketball player in history, who was kicked off his high school team at the age of 16. And actually, we see the same pattern in music. Business, it's kind of the same story. When the researchers study the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, they see a quite interesting pattern. These guys are very different, but 35% of the world's most successful entrepreneurs have one thing in common. What do you think that is? They're all dyslexic. Okay? They're all dyslexic. That's people we tend to categorize as low performers early on, but seems to possess a great potential. So, do we really know anything about what to look for? This is, without a doubt, the world's most successful sprint coach, head coach of MVP track and field club in Jamaica. You can forget everything about Bob Marley. This is the Jamaican hero. At the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, his sprinters won more medals on the sprint distances than the whole US did. As you can see, Mr. Francis doesn't look like a sprinter. Interesting enough, Stephen Francis didn't recruit the most talented athletes, the one that everybody else looked out for. Stephen Francis took athletes, 2nd level, 3rd level, 4th level athletes that nobody heard of and made them world class. The other type of talent, what Stephen Francis called a talent that whispers. And a talent that whispers is Asafa Powell, it's Simon Cowell, it's Paul McCartney, it's all the dyslexic entrepreneurs. The difference between talent that shouts and talent that whispers is to measure people on 2 parameters, performance and potential. Classic metrics. Performance is how well do people do right here, right now, easy to see, easy to measure. Potential is how well can people become in the future, short term as well as long term. He says if you have a sprinter running 10.2 and one running 10.6, who would you go for? The majority of all sprint coaches would, without thinking, go for the 10.2 guy because he's the fastest and therefore the most talented. That's not how Francis thinks. He said, imagine the 10.2 guy, you have the best coaches, the best training environments, early physical developed. The 10.6 guy basically trained on his own and not in a structured way at all. A raw 10.6 can be better than a trained 10.2. In other words, what you see is not necessarily what you get. So I asked the big guy, Francis, listen, why are you not building a proper running track? You're training the best athletes on the planet. And then he says something interesting. He says the biggest mistake you guys do in Europe and US, building talent and performance environments, is to think that the more comfort you give people, the better they'll perform. But I also want something that tests people, gives me the answer to what I think is the most important question. Who wants it most? Please identify what is the most effective training activity you do in a week. So that activity that has the most influence on your development, whatever you do. Everyone in Eriksson's study, no matter what group they were in, agreed that the critical factor, most effective training activity, was self-training. So his conclusion is, as he said to me, Rasmus, there are good news and there are bad news. The good news is that becoming good is possible for many more people than we think. The bad news, it's fucking hard. It's 10,000 hours. This is where the 10,000 hour rule comes from. Okay, if you heard about that. So they study experts in various fields with the conclusion that nobody becomes an expert with less than 10,000 hours of practice. Building a gold mine is about wasting less talent by looking a bit wider, finding the talent that your competitor will never find. Thank you very much for listening, and all the best.
Men det är inte så.